I love my daughter, Victoria, immensely. I couldn't imagine my life without this dear girl. However, our lives were not without hardships. Victoria and I faced challenges after the death of her mother, Julia. It was a tragic event, sudden and unexpected. We lived in a small yet beautiful countryside home near a narrow stream, whose murmur was enchanting. Julia worked as a manager in a large shopping complex, while I worked in home and apartment repairs. We had a good life, everything was going smoothly. We had enough money for everything we needed. Victoria grew up in a happy and complete family. It was a wonderful time that I remembered with fondness. But life presents situations beyond our control. One day, while Victoria was at daycare and I was at work, I received a phone call from an unfamiliar number. I answered anxiously. It was a call from the hospital. Julia had been in an accident, her car crashed. The brakes failed, and Julia veered off the road while turning. I dropped everything and rushed to the hospital. By the time I arrived, Julia was already in a coma, with numerous serious injuries. The doctors met me outside her room, explaining and trying to console me. But I simply couldn't believe what they were telling me. The doctors concluded that Julia wouldn't survive. I wandered through the hospital in tears, yelling, refusing to believe it. I desperately tried to find a way out of this situation. I called my sister, Rachel, to pick up Victoria from daycare while I stayed at the hospital. I began calling all acquaintances, trying to find connections to more qualified doctors who could give me hope and treat Julia. As I frantically worked my phone, a doctor approached me and took my hand. He said Julia had passed away. Her heart had stopped, and the doctors couldn't revive her. It was a tremendous shock for me. I desperately tried not to believe it, but the cold demeanor of the doctors made me understand the reality of the situation. And just like that, Julia was gone. Victoria was only 3 years old at the time. She wasn't independent yet, and it was difficult for me to balance work and caring for my daughter. Of course, my sister helped me. She loved Victoria and treated her like her own daughter, but it wasn't constant. Rachel had her own family and responsibilities. I understood this perfectly and didn't want to burden her with my problems. I tried to find a way out of this situation on my own. But eventually, I unexpectedly found a helper, Amanda. I was with Victoria in the store, buying groceries. Victoria was running around the store, making it impossible for me to get anything done. Then Amanda approached me, a beautiful, long-legged blonde with green eyes. She offered her help, noticing how I was struggling to catch Victoria between the aisles. She said she would help me take the cart to the car. I was very grateful for her assistance. It came at just the right time. Victoria was uncontrollable that day. On the way to the car, we talked, and Amanda made an incredible impression on me. I had only seen this girl for a few minutes, but it felt like I had known her all my life. It turned out she had seen me before. She lived nearby. She had recently moved to the area and had no acquaintances. We had a lot in common, and we began to communicate. Amanda started offering her help herself. She brought us homemade food, invited us over, and then started visiting us. It was very surprising. Amanda reminded me of Julia. I was drawn to Amanda, but I didn't rush things. After all, it hadn't even been a year since Julia's death. I didn't think about starting new relationships. But Amanda simply didn't give me a chance. She was very kind and caring, and we were spending more and more time together. And so, after some time, we were already living together. Amanda worked as a florist in a flower shop, and she managed household chores perfectly. She cooked deliciously and took care of Victoria. Later on, we got a dog named Rex. Rex quickly grew into a big dog. He was a German Shepherd. Rex had been an excellent protector for Victoria since childhood. Rex loved Victoria. But for some reason, Rex didn't warm up to Amanda. And Amanda wasn't exactly thrilled about the dog's presence either. However, she didn't voice any objections, as Victoria really wanted a dog. Then, a neighbor named Kevin moved in nearby. In my opinion, he was a great friendly guy, and we became friends. At first, everything was fine in our family. Victoria and I were gradually returning to normal life, slowly recovering from the tragedy we had experienced. But soon, strange things began happening. I started noticing these strange occurrences. I was working a lot and was rarely at home, only on weekends or coming home late in the evenings recently. I was striving to earn as much money as possible to ensure Victoria's future education. When I came home, I had a feeling that someone had been there. There seemed to be a strange smell in the house. Victoria also started behaving strangely. She became quieter, as if she were very scared. "Amanda, dear, I wanted to talk to you." "Jonathan, what's wrong?" "I've started noticing strange things. I'm particularly worried about Victoria. She seems scared, but she doesn't tell me anything." "Sweetheart, calm down. She's just a child. At her age, there can be sudden changes in character and behavior. There's no need to worry. Besides, I spend most of the time with her. And there haven't been any incidents at daycare. I regularly communicate with the caregivers there. Still, it all looks very strange. And I'm worried. And I constantly feel like someone's been in our house. What if some maniac or burglar is lurking nearby? I'm very anxious." "Jonathan, you're just getting yourself worked up. Nobody comes to our house without you. You're just starting to fantasize. There are no problems at all. Amanda, my intuition has never let me down. I'm sorry, but I've noticed that you're behaving strangely too. And I just have a feeling that you simply don't want to talk about all this. You're right about one thing. I really don't want to discuss all this, because there are absolutely no valid reasons to talk about anything. Stop getting yourself worked up, and everything will be fine." Talking to Amanda didn't make me feel any better. I started noticing that sometimes even Amanda seemed to lose touch with reality. Sometimes I saw her freeze in place and just stare out the window. When I called her, she didn't hear me and didn't react until I approached her closely and took her hand. At that moment, she seemed to wake up and looked at me bewilderedly, but then acted like nothing had happened. I noticed her gaze at the moment she froze. It was empty and cold, and I felt uneasy about such moments, to be honest. But I still didn't understand what was happening. And strange things kept happening. Several days later, I noticed that Amanda's hand was bandaged. When I began to ask what happened, Amanda said it was an accident at her work. She said she had cut herself badly while trimming flower stems. But on the same day, another incident occurred. Our dog went missing. Victoria was deeply upset and cried about it. The child seemed to want to tell me something, but still remained silent. And the dog was nowhere to be found. Amanda said she had no idea where the darn mutt was. She spoke rudely about the dog, saying it had escaped from the house and run away. It was strange because Rex was a very obedient dog. Especially when Victoria was at home, he never left her side. And Rex never ran away. All this added to my anxieties. But what bothered me the most was that Amanda didn't react at all to all these strange occurrences. I was starting to get confused. I had a feeling that something strange was happening behind my back. It was a powerful and disturbing feeling, but I couldn't figure out what was going on. Sometime later, another very mysterious and ominous incident occurred. I was at work, laying tiles in the kitchen for one of my clients. My phone was in the pocket of my jeans, and I heard it vibrating. I wiped my hands and took out the phone. It was Kevin calling. But as soon as I answered the call, all I heard was Jonathan, and then the call was disconnected. Despite just one word, I could tell that Kevin's voice sounded very concerned. But when I tried to call back, no one answered. I started to worry. I called again and again, but then even the phone call stopped going through, as if the phone were turned off. In the evening, before going home, I decided to stop by Kevin's to see if everything was okay. But there was no one at home, and the lights in the house were off. It was strange because usually at this time, Kevin was already home. When I came home, I again felt that nasty foreign smell. It was like cheap cologne mixed with bleach. Amanda was at home, calmly preparing dinner. I asked her if she had seen Kevin. But Amanda calmly replied that she hadn't seen him today. On one hand, nothing terrible had happened, but in the following days, my suspicions were confirmed. Kevin had been absent from home for several days now. He had disappeared without a trace. Kevin's relatives came by, and people from his work also visited, some asking me if I knew where Kevin was. Later, the police got involved. The case was becoming increasingly strange and mysterious. I was deeply upset because all these strange things were somehow connected to my family. But I couldn't find any solutions to this case. I felt very uncomfortable when I went to work. My family's safety was paramount. I wanted to protect my family from the looming threat. And I decided to install hidden cameras in the house. Since Amanda didn't share my concerns, I decided not to argue with her. I installed the hidden cameras in the house when nobody was there. Setting up the connections was easy for me. I chose the most suitable places both inside and outside the house. They were very discreet spots, not attracting attention. I carefully concealed all traces of this work so that no one would notice the surveillance cameras. I primarily hid the evidence from Amanda to prevent her from getting nervous. I rented a small cloud server where all the recorded video would be stored, and then I set up access directly from my phone. Everything was ready, and it gave me some peace of mind, albeit small. Now I could clearly know what was happening in my house and around it. At first, I reviewed the footage, but nothing suspicious caught my eye. Just the usual household routine. But then, one day, everything changed. It was a regular workday, and I was returning home. There were no signs of trouble. As I approached the house, a chill ran down my spine when I saw the partially open door swaying in the wind. I rushed inside and turned on the lights. It looked like a hurricane had swept through. Everything was overturned. Even the wallpaper was torn. All the hidden cameras were lying on the floor with their wires torn. Someone had clearly tried to find the server where the video was being recorded. Luckily, I had set up remote storage. Amanda and Victoria were nowhere to be found. The house was cool from the open doors. So, this havoc must have occurred a few hours ago. I was just in shock. With trembling hands, I grabbed my phone and started reviewing the footage. Everything was fine in the morning. But after lunch, Amanda returned, with Victoria. Amanda started fussing in the kitchen when suddenly the doorbell rang. Amanda opened the door. Some guy walked into the house. You could see a medical uniform under his coat. So that's where that smell of bleach came from. Victoria ran out of her room. Amanda started shouting at her, and then she roughly grabbed Victoria and dragged her into her room, locking the door. Then Amanda returned to the man, and they started having sex right there in the kitchen. I was simply breathless from what I saw. While this bastard was having his way with her, Amanda stared lasciviously right at the camera, and after a while, Amanda became suspicious. She pushed the bastard off her and walked with narrowed eyes to where the camera was installed. She pulled out the hidden camera. At first, a nasty smirk appeared on her face, and then the smirk turned into a terrifying grin. Her face looked like that of a deranged maniac. Then her lips tightened, and all the muscles on her face tensed with strain. And then Amanda started raging with anger. The man tried to calm her down, but she scratched his face and kicked him out onto the street. She started tearing out the camera wires. Then she began to overturn the whole house. It was sheer madness. It was terrifying to watch. As I watched this horrifying scene, I only thought about one thing, to make sure she didn't harm Victoria. Then Amanda apparently realized that all the data was being transmitted to a remote server on the internet. She grabbed Victoria and dragged her out onto the street. I dropped the phone. Amidst all this chaos, I noticed a large note taped to the door from the inside, with big letters saying not to do anything stupid and not to go to the police if I wanted Victoria to stay alive. With trembling hands, I called Amanda. On the phone, I heard an icy voice that filled me with dread. It was Amanda speaking, but it only vaguely resembled the Amanda I knew. She gave me an address where I had to come alone, and she threatened again not to go to the police. I leaped into the car and immediately headed to the location. But I had the sense not to act foolishly and promptly called the police. I provided them with the address I was heading to. Clearly, a trap awaited me, and I would hardly have saved Victoria otherwise. I arrived at the dilapidated old barn on the outskirts of the town. Dim light seeped through the cracks in the gates from a lamp inside. As soon as I pushed the gates wider and stepped inside, I received a heavy blow to the head. Snap out of it, you bastard. It's time for us to have a serious talk. Amanda brought me to my senses with a slap. Amanda, what the hell are you doing? Where's my daughter? How could you? What does all this mean? Why are you behaving like a crazed psychopath? And who's that bastard you were dirtying yourself with in our house? I began shouting, attempting to free my bound hands tied to a large support beam in the barn. It's not as simple as that, my dear Jonathan. But we still have time to chat, if you haven't done anything stupid. Your naivety annoys me. But don't hope that anything you saw will change anything. You're mine, Jonathan, and only mine. Amanda said with a manic expression. As Amanda spoke, I heard Victoria crying. She sat in the corner of the barn, and next to her, I saw our beaten dog whimpering in pain and Kevin lying beaten and bound. You monster! Is this your doing? What kind of filth are you? Watch your tongue, Jonathan. Otherwise, you won't have long. The damn dog bit me when I tried to lock Victoria in her room once again. Your stupid daughter had the sense to stay silent. I threatened her that if she said a word about my entertainment, I would kill her dear daddy. And I brought the dog to this place to die, far from prying eyes. That bastard Kevin came to our house at the wrong time when I was again entertaining William. He saw everything and wanted to warn you. But I was quicker. A blow to the head with a bat solves everything quickly. And now he's here just like your daughter and you. I didn't have time to finish everything. But today I will. What are you babbling about, Amanda? Jonathan, my dear Jonathan, you have no idea who I am. But I'll tell you a story. In the family, there were 2 girls. One girl had everything, all parental love, the best education, the best friends, the best guys. And the second sister was just a pale shadow, with nothing but anger. I tried to strangle that bitch, Julia, even in childhood. But they stopped me. And they sent me to a loony bin. But I knew I would get out. I'll take everything from that bitch. Everything, including you, Jonathan. What? You're Julia's sister? How can that be? I've never heard that Julia had a sister. You're lying. Silly Jonathan. I'm not going to prove anything to you. I just want to watch you suffer. I'll destroy everything that was dear to Julia, but first, I'll torment all of you. I gave you a chance at a normal life. First, this stupid dog. Then Victoria's excessive curiosity and the neighbors. And then your stupid hidden cameras. It would have been better if you knew nothing. But now you're to blame for everything, and you'll pay for it all. You sick bitch. Don't you dare touch my daughter. And what will you do to me? You're weak, Jonathan. You'll watch your daughter die. It's a pity you didn't see how Julia whimpered when her car went off the road. Because I tampered with the brakes in her car, cutting the brake fluid hose. I saw her groaning and trying to crawl out of the car. I wanted to finish her. But there were extra witnesses, and they took Julia to the hospital. But she was still destined to die. I planned everything, Jonathan, absolutely everything. It all looked like an unfortunate accident. You crazy bitch, you didn't plan everything. I yelled and tore the ropes. As Amanda recounted this story, I felt a shard of broken glass in the sand under my hands. Despite being shocked by her revelations, I began to cut the ropes. As soon as I freed my hands, I hurled a pile of sand into Amanda's eyes. For a moment, she lost control. And that was enough for me to rush towards her and grab the hand holding the revolver. Surprisingly, this psychopath was very strong, and we began to struggle. Shots rang out from the gun in different directions. Then I stumbled, and Amanda wrestled her hand with the revolver from my grip, and I fell. She aimed the revolver at me. But then something unbelievable happened. Apparently, as the bullets scattered chaotically around the barn, the attachment holding the chain was damaged. There was a truck motor hanging from the steel chain above, probably left there from some repair work long ago. And this motor fell right on top of that creature's head. Sprays of blood splattered my face. All that was left of Amanda was a wet spot. I quickly grabbed Victoria first, covering her eyes, and carried her outside. Then I returned for Kevin and the dog. When we were outside, everything around us was flashing with red and blue police lights. We were lucky, and we all survived. The terrible secret was revealed. Amanda was telling the truth. She was indeed Julia's sister. She had escaped from the psychiatric hospital. This bastard, William, who regularly visited Amanda for carnal pleasures, helped her. Amanda was a sick nymphomaniac with manic tendencies. But she was a psychopath and could easily hide her emotions. That's why I didn't suspect anything at first. She could easily manipulate people. William tried to escape. When they found this bastard, he started running and hiding in the forest. But it wasn't the best decision. Later, the police found his remains in the woods. He died a painful death, torn to pieces by wolves. Now the threat was over, but the terrible truth haunted my consciousness for a long time. It was hard to concentrate, but I still needed to live on somehow. Poor little Victoria had experienced too many terrifying events. But psychologists were able to help her, and Victoria began to forget these dreadful incidents. She finally began to sleep peacefully. Time passed. Victoria was already studying in high school. We managed to break free into a normal life. After what happened, it was hard for me to trust people, but eventually, I found someone with whom I could build new relationships over time. It was Sarah, my daughter's psychologist. Thanks to her efforts, Victoria was able to return to a normal life. Sarah helped a lot. She became Victoria's best friend. We became friends and communicated. And after a few years, we finally decided to try to establish deeper relationships. We started dating. And one day I felt that I could live on. I felt joy and could breathe freely again. Story 2. My name is Jonathan, and I've never experienced such intense anger in my life. The kind of anger I'm feeling is something no one should ever have to endure. I found myself wanting to confront 2 people at that very moment. So why am I so furious? I'll explain. It all began about 5 weeks ago when my wife started undergoing a noticeable transformation, like a chameleon right before my eyes. She started rejecting intimacy, including the physical aspects of a husband and wife's relationship. This immediately raised suspicions for me, as I once had a girlfriend who cheated on me, and that experience taught me some painful lessons. I never brought up my past experience with the first woman in my life to the now second woman. I doubt it would have made a difference anyway. During the second week of her transformation, I decided to dig deeper. I'm not the kind of guy who seeks help from a private investigator or someone else to solve my problems. No, I'm a hands-on guy who prefers to handle my own issues. Thank you very much. I followed her during her lunch break from work when she parked at that motel and walked briskly to room 104. I knew she was cheating on me. Her job didn't require her to deal with customers outside of the workplace at all. In fact, she had no customer interaction because she worked in the record-keeping department. Discovering her infidelity was painful, but not nearly as painful as the taunts, insults, and slights she had subjected me to already. The man she was meeting was a co-worker of sorts who worked in a different department. I had heard that he was quickly advancing in his career and climbing the corporate ladder rapidly. After observing them meeting 3 times in 2 weeks, I decided on my approach to this issue. I would confront it head-on. I'm too frugal to spend my hard-earned money on confirming what I already knew. So, I waited until now, knowing that just behind this door, my wife was in the arms of another man. It was going to be a close call. I had to confront them, gather evidence, and in my current emotional state, I could still pursue a legal claim for alienation of affection. Her employer would also face severe consequences for allowing this to happen. My guess was that Mr. On the Way Up was soon to become Mr. On the Way Out. I needed photographic evidence, and then I needed to serve my soon-to-be ex-wife with divorce papers. The locks on our house were being changed as I stood there, having paid the locksmith just before leaving home. I had reorganized all of our shared finances and divided them equally. I had also canceled all our credit cards. Over the past 2 weeks, I had taken various steps, and now the final upheaval was about to unfold. I can't say for sure how Simone will react. I believe she might feel relieved rather than upset, although guilt could weigh on her shortly. My attorney, who has extensive experience with divorces, assured me that the guilt would fade as soon as she hired her own lawyer. Do I love her, you may wonder? Well, right now, I utterly and openly despise her. Yet, deep inside, I'm engaged in a profound inner struggle grappling with the idea that she truly loves me, and this is just a terrible mistake on her part. a lapse in judgment that we might be able to mend. However, I know logically that it won't happen. I cannot accept a wife who would betray my trust. There's not a shred of trust left in me for her. The love I still feel for her is the part that hasn't had time to come to terms with this sudden and complete transformation that has occurred so swiftly. The motel manager handed me the room key, a $100 bill, and a promise not to damage the place served as the price for obtaining the key. He's a decent guy, and I'm sure it's not his fault that my wife and her lover chose this location for their secret meetings. He also mentioned something about his ex-wife and how there were some similarities between us. Inserting the key, I quietly opened the door and stepped into the room, leaving it slightly ajar. I aimed the camera and entered the room completely. I love this digital camera, I thought to myself. I'm so grateful she gave it to me for my birthday 3 months ago. She was shouting at the guy to get off her, and he was furious and trying to get up. I took several more pictures, capturing her in a compromising position. Simone was crying, attempting to cover up while he persisted in his foolish actions. I secretly hoped he would make that choice, which made my next move feel quite natural. "Who are you? Get the heck out of here before I kick your behind," I declared. I am her soon-to-be ex-husband. Whose behind is getting kicked is up for debate. I don't think you're going to kick mine. I moved to one side as he approached, setting the camera down and turning slightly to the right. I allowed him to come up on my left. Releasing the camera, I began to turn rapidly, and in doing so, I swung my arm forcefully. My fist connected with his feet, lifted off the floor from the force of my anger, pain, and just a hint of fear. I was afraid I would lose control and hurt him, and he simply wasn't worth it. I must have been angrier than I realized. I bent over and checked for his pulse. There was a pulse, so I eased up. I heard Simone going on and on about something, and then I turned to face her. She suddenly fell silent, fear choking her voice. I could tell she had never seen me like this before, and I must have appeared significantly different from the man she had breakfast with this morning. "Well, enjoy this situation. He's all yours now. I want nothing to do with your cheating ways anymore," I declared. She sat there, tears streaming down her face, trembling and hugging herself. She couldn't meet my gaze, something I had noticed happening more frequently lately. But now she knew that I knew the game was over. She glanced at me standing over her lover, and I saw her shudder. However, her eyes didn't linger on me for long. "Here are the standard divorce papers. I'm filing for divorce. The locks on the house have been changed. I've set up a bank account with your share of everything. You've been served, and we're done. Thanks." I turned and left, hearing her plead with me as I walked out the door. "Wait, let me explain, please, Jonathan, please." I kept moving. I couldn't let her see my eyes at that moment, they were filled with tears, and I knew that if I turned back, I might weaken and deviate from my plan. Too much had happened, and I had too many issues to reconsider what was one was no more. When I got home, I found the locksmith patiently waiting. He had changed all 3 entry locks, and the garage door opener had been reprogrammed. I thanked him for the quick job and gave him a $20 tip. Sitting inside the house that used to be our home, I sat at the kitchen table reflecting on the years we spent together. I couldn't fathom why Simone had changed or why she suddenly saw me as less than what she once did. I couldn't find a single reason for her actions. What I did know was that our relationship had come to an end in the span of 5 weeks. The pain and words had transformed me into a different person. Unfortunately, Simone seemed to have missed this change as it occurred, just as I had overlooked the changes in her. The phone rang, and I checked the caller ID to see that it was Simone's mom. I answered, and she inquired, "John, what's going on?" "Simone came over here in tears saying that she's ruined your marriage." "What's happened?" I replied, "Well, Doris, it's like this. Simone will need to tell you the details, but in summary, I found her at a motel today and served her with divorce papers." Doris sounded perplexed. "Why, John? I don't understand this at all." I explained, "Look, I'm really sorry, Doris. You know how much I love you and Sam, and this whole situation is tough on all of us, but it has to be this way." Tears streamed down my cheeks. Now, I genuinely cared for Simone's parents. They had been incredibly kind to me throughout the years we were together. Hearing the pain and confusion in Doris's voice deeply affected me, and I was grateful that this conversation was happening over the phone. I didn't want them to witness my emotional state. Doris persisted, "John, can't you two work it out somehow?" I replied somberly, "I don't think so, Doris. This is a significant issue, one of those life-altering events that shatter everything." A solemn silence followed on the other end of the line as Doris tried to come to terms with this sudden and distressing news. I sympathized with her, especially since we had just had dinner with Doris and Sam the previous night, and Simone had acted affectionate in front of her parents. It had been surprising to me. We had argued on the way to their house, and naturally, I received the cold shoulder on the way back. However, while at Doris and Sam's, we had portrayed the perfect couple. I didn't want our fight to be visible, as I wanted to shield Sam from the hurt caused by his daughter's actions. Now, it seemed I should have somehow forewarned them before taking the steps I had just taken. Sam's health wasn't in great shape, given the years of demanding jobs and his history of smoking, which had taken a toll on his well-being. Although Doris was in good health, she was always concerned about Sam. I felt regretful for not having given them some form of heads-up regarding this chaotic situation. A few days later, my phone rang once more. Glancing at the caller ID, I saw that it was Simone's father. I answered the call, and he began, "John, I need to discuss something concerning my daughter's unfortunate relationship. Simone revealed everything to her mother last night, and I was present too. Can we meet? I want to share with you the exact details of what happened to her." I had a genuine affection for Simone's parents, so I agreed to meet Simone's father. He then recounted Simone's conversation with her mother when they spoke about me and my decision to serve her with divorce papers. Simone's mother had asked, "Well, Simone, I'm your mother, and John is like a son to me. I'm sorry to hear that John served you with divorce papers. However, you have to tell me what happened. It's not enough to mention that John found you in a motel room. I want to know all the details. Why were you in the motel, and who were you with?" Simone explained, "Mom, Jonathan and I weren't getting along as well as we did when we first got married. He had been swamped with work, juggling several projects, and it was taking a toll on our personal life. We had discussed it since it was significantly affecting our relationship. I knew that in a few months, all his hard work would likely result in a promising promotion. Meanwhile, at my job, Greg discovered an error I had made with some employee records. It wasn't a major mistake, but it was a serious oversight on my part that could have jeopardized my upcoming promotion, raise, and career progress. Greg, being the kind of man he is, used this information and essentially blackmailed me into meeting him for lunch one day. This eventually led to the closeness as a one-time arrangement to prevent the consequences of my mistake. While I wasn't thrilled about the situation, one thing that made me agree was the fact that Jonathan and I hadn't been getting along well, and our intimacy had dwindled over the last 6 months. It wasn't until that first meeting with Greg that I realized I had also been feeling like I was missing out on some life experiences that others had had. Jonathan had been my only partner, and I had never been with any other man. Our first encounter with Greg took place in his office during lunch. Everyone had left as usual, and I stayed behind. Greg had been waiting for me and had even brought a small bottle of my favorite wine along with some cheese and crackers. Typically, our lunch breaks lasted an hour, and colleagues would go to local restaurants or street vendors to eat. I usually grabbed something quick from a street vendor's cart and then found solitude at the park. That first day, nobody seemed to notice our absence. Greg turned out to be much kinder than the initial impression I had of him as a mean blackmailer. That first encounter was a sort of liberation for me. After that day, I found myself desiring it more, despite knowing it was wrong. Even though I still loved my husband Jonathan, Greg treated me differently, like his possession or something. With him, I could let go and be a completely different person. By the end of that lunch, I had engaged in activities with Greg that I had never done with my husband. We had just managed to straighten things out before our colleagues returned, and I left his office feeling less angry toward him than when it all began. Later that day, as I tasted his presence on my lips, I couldn't help but think about the next time. It was an unexpected thought that revealed my desire for Greg once more. Greg also wanted more than just one encounter. The next day, he approached me about it, and we once again engaged in an office affair. During those encounters, he began making negative comments about Jonathan. Over the next 2 weeks, a pattern emerged. While we were intimate, Greg would say hurtful things about Jonathan. He even suggested that Jonathan might be cheating on me, given the state of our relationship at home. I gradually adopted Greg's perspective. Over time, I started belittling and criticizing Jonathan to everyone except you and Dad. I was afraid that you and Dad would see right through me, so I pretended to be a loving wife when you and Dad were around. So just before the motel rendezvous, Jonathan and I were distant, and Greg and I had transitioned from an affair to a full-blown relationship. Greg suggested that using a motel would be a safer way for us to meet until we could figure out a better plan. His wife was becoming suspicious, and he believed someone at work might have noticed how often we were together, given that we worked in different departments. We never discussed leaving our spouses. It never crossed our minds. We were simply meeting for physical satisfaction. I failed to recognize that with Jonathan, there was love, respect, and understanding. I abandoned those qualities for physical gratification, lust, and the way Greg dominated me. Jonathan respected me and would never take anything without my full consent. Greg, on the other hand, took whatever he wanted and ordered me around, devoid of any genuine love. His wife provided the emotional support he needed. Meanwhile, I let my emotional connection with Jonathan wither in favor of the excitement I experienced with Greg. Looking back, I now realize I made the biggest mistake of my life 10 weeks ago, and there's no way to go back and fix it. When Jonathan entered the room that day, it took me by surprise. I panicked, attempting to conceal myself and push Greg away. By the time Greg got up, I looked at John's face and saw a complete stranger. There was a look in his eyes that I had never witnessed before. Jonathan began taking pictures of us while Greg stepped off the bed, muttering something that I couldn't catch. Jonathan calmly placed the digital camera on the nearby table where he stood. What happened next left me stunned. Greg began advancing toward Jonathan, making threats. The next thing I witnessed was Greg soaring about 2 feet into the air before landing on his back. Jonathan's gaze met mine, and I couldn't bear to look at him any longer. I attempted to cover myself with the sheet, feeling frightened, embarrassed, and, most of all, deeply ashamed. Jonathan called me a derogatory term and tossed some folded papers onto the bed. I overheard something about papers and divorce being served. I stared at the bed sheets, unsure if my husband was going to harm me too. I was scared, embarrassed, and overwhelmed by shame. Suddenly, Jonathan turned and started walking out, taking the camera from the table. I cried out to him, though I can't recall what I said. I just remember feeling that whatever I uttered must have sounded hollow. Later, I took a long shower without checking on Greg. I no longer cared whether he was alive or not. The motel manager came to check on the room, and that's when I learned that Jonathan had purchased a key from him. The manager regarded me with disdain. He shared that he had caught his wife with another man in a room similar to the one Jonathan had rented, which was the real reason he had given Jonathan the key. He informed me that I had really messed up. He didn't need to tell me, I already knew. I had just thrown away the best thing I ever had in my life, all because I got entangled in my affair and foolishly believed I had something special. The following day, she arrived at work, and 3 men were waiting in my office, the company president, the human resources manager, and a man whom I assumed was the company lawyer. They inquired about how Greg and I had become involved, and I explained everything, holding nothing back. I could see the expressions on my colleagues' faces as they passed by the office, the same looks I had seen when I arrived that morning, and I knew I would be terminated by the end of the day. However, I was mistaken. First, the HR representative ensured that the initial encounter with Greg had been a form of blackmail. Then they made me sign some documents about Greg and me. I was out of the office and on the street before lunch. The company couldn't retain me, but due to Greg's initial blackmail, they had to provide me with severance pay. Apart from that, I was let go. Greg was escorted out of the building by security and handed over to the police. It turned out he had been involved in other illegal activities, which emerged during questioning. Greg was in serious legal trouble. Later, I discovered that Greg had been embezzling from the company in various small ways, such as manipulating receipts from business trips. In total, it amounted to enough to charge him with grand larceny. Greg's wife left him, taking their 3 children and returning to her parents' home in the East. Greg was in jail awaiting trial. Initially, I was asked to testify, but when I spoke with the district attorney, she realized that my testimony would likely do more harm than good. Consequently, they decided not to use me as a witness. Greg's lawyer inquired if I would testify in Greg's defense. Once I explained that I would testify about how Greg had initially coerced me into a closeness and subsequently drove a wedge between my husband and me, even he concluded that I wouldn't be a valuable witness. "Mom, I honestly don't know how I managed to make such terrible decisions," her mother replied. "Simone, you've committed one of the gravest mistakes possible. You've not only disappointed your parents and yourself but also betrayed your husband. You, young lady, have completely ruined 2 marriages and shattered your husband's love. Your actions have sunk to the lowest of lows. I still love you because you're my daughter, but I've lost all respect for you." Sam informed me that Doris and he allowed Simone to move in with them. He sounded distraught, which brought tears to my eyes as well. They were good people, and I felt sorry that they had been dragged into this mess. I understood that if I had warned her parents, Simone might have received a heads up, and I wouldn't have obtained the necessary pictures. Well, I didn't really need them for the court unless her lawyer became confrontational. In case of any confrontations, the pictures would be presented along with sworn testimony from 6 different individuals regarding their involvement. I hesitated to call it an affair. I'm uncertain if Simone was genuinely in love with this man or if she initially participated willingly. Her father's statements suggested that Greg might have had some leverage over Simone at the beginning. My lawyer was making the most of the case against Simone's employer, which had already been filed while I was preparing to visit the motel room. He filed the case in court, and then within 20 minutes was on the phone with the company's lawyers who were quite agitated. Naturally, they were also in denial, but my lawyer mentioned the sworn statements, and suddenly the company took a different stance. Based on what my lawyer told me, I knew that Simone, her lover, and possibly others involved were likely to be terminated from their jobs the next day unless they could provide a reasonable excuse for their behavior. As for me, I knew that the case for alienation of affection against Greg was strong given his employer's actions. We had sworn statements from 3 of his coworkers and 1 of hers about their clandestine activities at work. Some supervisors at the company had also speculated about them, but no one had confronted them or informed me. We had affidavits from the motel owner and a cleaning lady as well, making it a total of 6 witnesses of sorts, along with my pictures as concrete proof of the affair occurring during company hours. Their use of the motel had been an attempt to avoid the prying eyes of coworkers, as Greg had realized they were becoming too conspicuous. He was also aware of the company's policies regarding workplace relationships and ethics, and my lawyer had gathered plenty of information on that front. I learned that Simone and the other man had been together for a little over 5 weeks by the time I sensed that something was amiss. So, Simone had been involved in this affair for just over 10 weeks in total when I confronted them at the motel. The moment I found out about it 5 weeks earlier had been one of the most challenging times in my life. I'd experienced 3 of those moments so far, and by now, I hoped I'd never have to go through another as long as I lived. Leaving the motel room that day left me feeling more numb than ever. Simone was still on the bed crying, and Greg was still unconscious. The motel manager met me in the hallway, and I handed him the key. He offered some kind words of comfort, placing his hand on my shoulder. "It's tough right now, but it will get better. Move on, find yourself, and then find someone else. You'll be okay," he said. I knew it was going to be painful for a while, depending on how much I had loved her and cared for her. Thanks, I had already figured that out. Simone didn't put up any fight during the divorce proceedings. It all went incredibly smoothly. My lawyer and hers, I believe, were surprised. She seemed completely resigned, and although I could see she was suffering, at least she didn't attempt to justify her actions. Once the divorce was finalized, the case against her former employer was wrapped up as well. They just wanted me to disappear, and they were willing to cover my lawyer fees, court costs, and offer a substantial sum to ensure that. Since then, Simone has been facing difficulties. She's alone, jobless, and living with parents who have been profoundly affected by her actions. Adding to her stress, the stigma of being an imposter lingers over her, and it will take a long time to shake it off. Nonetheless, she has the chance to start anew. I hope that eventually, she can move forward and not carry this pain with her every hour. Perhaps she's learned a painful lesson, and only time will reveal. Greg ended up in jail, and I relished that moment. Now he'd experienced a different kind of intimacy, hopefully from the receiving end this time. I have no sympathy for him. To me, he's not a man, he's nothing. He had a wife and 3 kids. I met her once during the chaos of the divorce, and she was an attractive woman. What a foolish decision Greg made. He had everything and threw it all away in pursuit of some thrill he must have believed he couldn't get from her. I resigned from my job, which left my employers in shock. They made every effort to convince me to stay, but my personal issues were too overwhelming to continue working effectively. After doing what they could, they offered me a well-crafted letter of recommendation, which I accepted. I have since found a new job on the West Coast, and I relocated about a year ago. I met a wonderful young woman who's a real keeper. I still struggle with trust issues, but she has an ex-husband who cheated on her, so we share a common understanding.